Thank you, Leslie, for joining in today. She is the founder of Sales-Led GTM Agency, and she champions the conversational sales approach, engaging prospects and getting conversions for B2B companies. She also has the LinkedIn Top Voice badge.
I'm so excited to join you. Anybody that's been following me for any amount of time knows that I am deeply passionate about the SDR and BDR function and the role that outbound plays.
Let's start with the first question. My first question is, if you could share some unique insights about life of an SDR, because you've talked to so many SDRs, trained so many SDRs, and you've yourself taken more than 100,000 sales cold calls. So what do you think, is the most important or unique thing that makes an SDR, and something that people outside of sales ecosystem might not be aware of?
Yes, so I've made over 100,000 cold calls, although I feel like I should recount that because it has to be higher than that. I just kind of like plucked 100,000 cold calls out of the air because it sounded like a good number, and I did some quick math and it seemed to make sense. The life of an SDR. I think maybe a little known fact about the life of the SDR is folks don't understand how fun the role can be if you are in a position to be creative with your prospecting. Like I think for outbound, one of my favorite parts is like putting on my detective cap and finding meaningful reasons to reach out to people and finding creative ways to uncover new leads and new like pathways into contact them. So I don't know, folks might argue that being an SDR isn't a particularly creative role. But I think it's really creative between like writing copy and figuring out creative ways to prospect and creative ways to get your prospects' attention. I think it's a very creative job.
Thank you, Leslie, for the wonderful answer. I think you were absolutely right when you said that creativity is a big part of being a great SDR. Along with that, I think there are a lot of playbooks that we've recently heard of. That hey, if you follow this playbook, this process, so this is the way to achieve success in sales, specifically in a B2B category in SaaS industry. So my next question here is that what will it really take in 2024, now that we have AI, we have all these fancy things coming in, to crush sales targets and yield crazy amazing results for your companies?
Okay, crushing sales targets, yielding surprising results. I'm going to say something that might be counterintuitive or an unpopular opinion. I don't think that having great results in 2024 is going to be about doing more in like making more calls, sending more emails, which I'm sure that at least one of you on this call has a manager that's like, we really need to up our rates that we're reaching out to people. I don't think that's it because the market is so flooded with emails, with cold calls, with LinkedIn emails, all of that. I think the key to success in 2024 is going to be pattern interrupts. Like, what are you doing to get your prospects' attention that is not the quote unquote best practice or the norm? Because everything that I think I see mostly on LinkedIn that's quote unquote best practice is something that worked like 2 to 3 years ago. And now our buyers are hip to it. Things like starting a subject line with quick question. Now our buyers have filters set up to automatically route stuff like that into junk. So pattern interrupts, going back to the creativity. And then I would say the other thing is personalization that matters to your buyer. We need to stop personalizing with things like congrats on your Series A or congrats on your LinkedIn testimonial or I see you're the title at company. Like, we cannot read the news to our prospects and expect them to care. So if you are going to personalize, it has to be relevant to whatever you're going to say next. And if you can't find something to personalize your message that would without keeping it relevant, in 2024, my plea to you is to forget the hyper personalization and instead focus on relevance and value when you're communicating with your prospects.
So I think that's a very fair point that we kind of, when we talk about personalization, we kind of go into the whole thing of over personalizing it. That hey, let's talk about the event that that person attended, or let's talk about a particular review that they probably put out on social media. There's so many things that people are doing, and sometimes it probably just feels a little too intrusive. To be very honest, that hey, like I mean I don't want you to know so many things, and I know personalization works, but this is just too much. So I think, Leslie, what we would also want to know is that if you could give some example of relevant personalization that has worked for you in the past, or maybe some for some company, a campaign that you did wherein it kind of resulted in conversions.
Yeah, relevant personalization. So, what I teach is value based segmentation. And that it just means that you take your whole ICP and then you build layers into the segmentation. So, let's say that you reach out to finance executives in North America and a couple of industries. That's really broad. It's impossible to create a message that's going to be relevant to everybody in your ICP. So instead of saying finance executives, say CFOs, because the way you're going to speak to a CFO is different than to a director of finance. They're solving very different problems. And all of us have seen the emails that are like finance executives like you or HR executives like you. And we immediately know that it's a generic email. So just to CFOs, and instead of every industry, say just to consumer packaged goods. And instead of even doing all of CPG, maybe you say only to F&B, to food and beverage brands. And then instead of North America, it's only maybe the Northeast. And then you might want to add in some additional layers for like revenue band or employee count, and then hopefully some sort of trigger event that's the reason for your outreach. So, what that allows when we're thinking about personalization, relevant personalization in our messaging, is it allows you to more deeply understand the exact persona that you are speaking to, the challenges they're facing, maybe the goals they have, the opportunities they want to seize in 2024. So, without having to hyper personalize every single message with things like, I saw on your LinkedIn profile, you can create messaging that is so tailored to the problems that they are trying to solve, that you're just bringing a lot more value to the conversation. So that's the value-based segmentation play is my number one play for creating relevant personalization, because it also has an element of being able to do some micro scaling within. You're not creating one-to-one messaging, you're creating one-to-many messaging still, but one-to-many messaging that is hyper relevant, hyper valuable to your prospect.
So you mentioned something, Leslie, about value-based segmentation, which sounded really interesting. Could you just throw some more light on the same?
Yeah, value-based segmentation. I've been teaching this play to my clients for a while. And it came from I think a frustration that sales teams were either taking a quantity approach to outreach, and I'd hear them say things like, yeah, my outreach works. I set 3 meetings, and then you ask how many emails they sent, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, I sent 3,000 emails to get 3 meetings. Sure, you got 3 meetings, but that doesn't work. Like that is not a repeatable process. That's not a durable approach to outbound. You're going to burn through your territory. Or they would take a quality approach where they were spending an hour researching every single prospect before they would send an email or make a call to try to find that piece of hyper personalization, because that's what was best practice, was to find that one thing. And like, let's be honest, we've all seen those emails. It's like, oh, well, I hope you enjoyed your trip to Cabo in 2017. Like, really looked amazing to swim with the dolphins. Anyways, buy my widget. Right? So it was this discrepancy between people thinking you either had to take a quality approach or a quantity approach, and neither really working. So I asked myself, how can we meet in the middle? How can we create messaging that is truly meant for the person that's receiving it, which that's the goal of the like hyper personalization, right? The person reads the email, they know it's really meant for them. So how can we still create emails that the prospect knows are meant for them without having to find those hyper personalization tokens, without everything having to be one-on-one, because that is, frankly, for most organizations, that's not scalable. How can we balance that with a quantity approach? Because like at the end of the day, metrics do still matter. You have to do a certain amount of outreach to get enough people that open your emails, that reply to them, that set the meetings, that open the opportunities, et cetera, to hit revenue targets. So that's where I came up with the value-based segmentation. And like I said, the gist is that you dig into your territory, you dig into your ICP a little bit more so that you can create small buckets of folks within your territory. So you're writing one message that is pertinent to all of them. And so maybe it only scales to 12 people, to 37 people, to 54 people. But instead of writing one-to-one, you can still write one to many. So that is my favorite approach. It works really well. And it's called value-based segmentation.
I think this is one of the very interesting takeaways from this session, that actually combining the whole qualitative with quantitative approach and yet having a one-to-many outreach. So thank you so much, Leslie, for this beautiful concept that you taught all of us today. And we talked about matrix. You talked about that, hey, like at the end of the day, it's about driving those results. So what really works matters. So my next question is essentially around that as an SDR, you're doing so many things. You're doing data, you're doing segmentation. We're kind of doing outreach with campaigns, one-on-one, one-to-many. So how do you really measure success, and what are the KPIs that SDRs need to track their performance against, and that founders or leaders of companies should be mindful of, that, hey, these are the KPIs that I need to make sure that my sales team is fulfilling, and this is how I measure their performance, essentially.
So measuring growth in role, I think there's a soft skill components to this. Like, are you growing as a sales professional? And then there's obviously a revenue component, or for SDRs, that might be a meeting set component, whatever your key result area is. Revenue contributed, sales qualified, meetings booked, etc. So if I was coaching an SDR that was newer in seat, maybe the first 1 to 3 years of their career, at the end of the day, the most important metric for your growth is going to be achieving that key result area. Because it doesn't really matter how good you think you are at those soft skills like EQ or active listening or curiosity, etc., if it's not showing up in the results, meaning you are hitting your MQL or SQL or revenue contributed to numbers, it's going to be hard to continue to grow in the profession of sales in terms of getting your next, your promotion or your next role with your next company, etc. So keep an eye on making sure that you're delivering whatever your quota is. But then that's where I think the growth stuff comes in. And I was talking earlier about how folks get obsessed with quantity. And often when SDRs aren't hitting their number, they or maybe their managers default to saying, we need more volume. If you're not booking in your 12 meetings a month, you need to reach out to twice as many people so you get your 12 meetings a month. I don't think that is the right path. What I would look at are your personal metrics. So go through your own data and see, how many phone calls does it take for me to book a meeting on average? How many emails do I need to send to book a meeting on average. And you can start finding ways to invest in your own development, like not the things that everybody in the company is being coached on, or not the metrics that everybody in the SDR team is looking at. And let me give you some examples of what that could look like. So you look at how many touch points it takes on like LinkedIn, email, and the phone to reach a prospect. And you realize that you are especially strong on the phone. Like that's where you have your best conversion rate. That's where most of your meetings come from. So that could be an opportunity for you to sit down with your manager and say, hey, I looked at my data. This is what I've uncovered. I'd like to build more phone heavy sequences because I think that that's going to be a way to leverage this strength on the phone to book more meetings. So that's a way to help you grow something like a skill set you're already strong about. It's a way to show those sort of leadership skills and that strategic mindset that are going to help you get your next role look promotable. Or maybe it's something like, I looked at my email conversion rates and they are significantly lower than the average of the company. So I've identified that email is something that I'm maybe not as strong at. So you can use that as an opportunity to maybe sit down with somebody on the team who's great at writing emails and help them do an audit of your emails. Or maybe you are through that process realizing that you have the same open rates as everybody else on the team, but not the same reply rates. So it gives you a chance to say, okay, maybe I should explore new calls to action in my emails. Or maybe it's the follow-up that I'm not as strong about, but my initial emails are strong. So it was a really long way of saying, at the end of the day, your results are really the most important metric. Like that is going to be what facilitates your growth through a career in sales. And the best way to facilitate that is to not take sort of generic advice about what SDRs in general should do more of, or even what good looks like on your team, but instead to use it as an opportunity to dig into what you are doing well and not so well, and invite strategic conversations around those pieces.
So that's very nicely put, Leslie, because not just you didn't just talk about the matrix and KPIs and what we need to chase, but also how to kind of become better at our work. I mean, at the end of the day, the sales stream is driving, the revenue stream is driving growth and deals and revenue at the end of the day for company, and it's just important. Like we've talked a lot about the whole process of the outreach process and the kind of things that SDRs should essentially do in order to kind of outperform, and how should they be judged on their performance. But one key component in sales is that, hey, when you're doing a pitch, there is a pitch that is planned, there's a presentation that goes out, there's a meeting, the demo call that gets booked, but there are objections that come in. Hey, either you're too pricey, the price point is not as per the industry standard, or something else. There are different objections. And when that's happening, a lot of things are at play. I mean, perception of the client is also at play. So how do you manage objections when they come for client, and they can be across different parameters like price, or maybe the product is not that good or not the right fit? So how should a salesperson tackle that?
Yeah, you're absolutely going to get objections if you are doing outbound. So one thing I would say to start is that it is extremely difficult to handle, to overcome, whatever terminology you want to use, objections in a written format. So whenever you can, get on a call so that it can be a discussion. When I get objections, like somebody replies to an email with an objection answer, the first thing I'm going to do is reply to that email and ask them for 5 minutes of their time so that we can discuss one-on-one. So make it phone first whenever possible. My approach to handling objections, I use a 3C format, which is curiosity, conversation, conclusion. So we are often taught to be the kind of confrontational when handling objections, which that just turns prospects off. And we are also taught that the only positive outcome is solving or handling or overcoming that objection. I also think that creates a bit of a false dichotomy. So the framework that I created, curiosity, conversation, conclusion, it starts with curiosity because the best way to dig into an objection and better understand it is to get curious, to start asking questions. And what we often do as sellers is we jump into problem solving mode or helping mode. And we're not necessarily trying to sell or to like bulldoze the person that we're talking to, but it's likely that we've heard this objection many, many times before, and we are excited to offer a solution. Unfortunately, what we might perceive as helper mode just feels to our prospects like they are being sold. So, what you want to resist doing anytime you hear an objection is talking at the prospect, and instead replace that with open ended questions to give you an opportunity to lead with curiosity. And that's the second point, which is conversation. The number one metric for success when you hear an objection is whether or not you were able to continue the conversation afterwards. That's it. The number one metric for success when you hear an objection is, were you able to continue the conversation afterwards? If you were able to do that, incredible. I'm going to chalk that up to a win. And so then when we move to the third C, conclusion isn't always going to be, I solved the objection they gave me, I overcame the objection they gave me. It could be, I learned that this is actually not the right product for them, or this is not the right time, or I learned that what I was saying in my impact statement didn't really resonate with them, but they gave me two other ideas that are trends that are really top of mind for folks in their industry. So curiosity, instead of talking at your prospects, lead with that curiosity, lead with questions. If you can continue the conversation in any way after you get an objection, that's a win. Congratulations. And just remember that the conclusion doesn't have to be overcoming the objection. It can also be learning, practicing, and other types of growth.
Leslie, that's absolutely great advice. This 3C approach. I think most of us are going to talk to our sales teams about it and tell them about it. And that's a brilliant way to, in fact, even look at it. And one line that kind of has stayed with me is when you said that never talk back at the prospect and don't straight away jump to a solution or a conclusion, because that's essentially what we are wired to do. You hear a problem, listen to a problem, you want to jump at it and solve it. But in a sense, it's important to have that conversation and to dig and delve further and deeper into it. So there's one question that I would love to ask you is that one top tip, one tip if you want to leave our audience with from your experience, and for all the SDRs and for all the sales team heads out there who are trying to make a name for themselves in this space, what would be that one tip, one takeaway from your experiences?
Ooh, number one tip would be that sales is a craft, which means you're probably going to be kind of bad at a lot of elements of it. Like, nobody shows up on day one of the job and is incredible at cold calling or diffusing objections or writing amazing email copy. So acknowledge that it's a craft, which means that you're going to have to continually invest in those skill sets. And the more you intentionally invest and practice and gain experience, the better you will be. So give yourself permission to make some mistakes. Don't beat yourself up about it. Have fun, be creative, invest in yourself, invest in this profession, treat it like a craft, and you will go places.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Yes, I think it's a beautiful summary to this session also, because when Leslie started, the first thing that she said was that sales is an art. It's a craft. Don't look at it like a step-by-step science project, something that you can just get an answer to. I think it was a great session. And guys, if you have any questions, you can send your questions to both me and Leslie. Thank you so much for Leslie for coming in today, and thank you, audience, for coming in today. Over to you, Leslie, to say your thank yous.
Thank you all so much for spending time with us today. The skill set of being able to open doors to get the attention of your prospect and start those conversations, that is a skill set that will serve you through the rest of your sales career. So keep investing in yourself, keep treating sales like a craft, and just wishing you tremendous success in 2024.